British, an Englishman who left when India gained independence and left this to Mohan, not the Mohan some of you might know. Mohan, who
Not
was
he
his,
was Mohan.
Mohan, who was his major domo, and Mohan ran that place. These were stories only PSG knew. And if you ask him, where the hell did you get all these stories, sir? I know. There was another story. As students, we had to do what we call as a book review. You know, you take a book you would have read in Hindu and all that. You review a book. That was one of our academic tasks those days. And these were sort of books that were a bit controversial, contentious, but which touched on the area of mental health. I was reviewing one such book written by a chap called Ivan Illich. He's a Mexican philosopher and iconoclast. The reason I mentioned Pink Floyd was the album Wall was inspired by one of Ivan Illich's book called Deschooling Society. So I finished review of the book. PSG was in the audience. He winked at me and called me aside, and I said yes. This book was called Medical Nemesis, where Ivan Illich literally destroys the medical fraternity and the medical institutions, etc., saying that they're all made of a bunch of bogus guys and should stay as far away from doctors and hospitals as you should, some of which I do endorse. But the fact remains that PSG called me and said, did you know this? I said, what? He had Bedi when he was in India. He had actually visited Nimitz. And he was admitted in a hospital, man. The same person who actually destroyed medical institutions, PSG had this little story, which no one knew and I didn't know at the time I did the book review. See, he had all these fun of stories, great fun, great conversationalist. So after I left Nimitz, I sort of became a very close colleague and a friend of his, part of the family. So we would very often meet, discuss. Somebody mentioned Tamil movies. He knew Tamil movies, he knew Bombay movies, he knew which was the best plum cake to get from where, which is the best samosa available where. I mean, you name it, he knew all of that. That was him. And we had some great time having evenings with him, eating food cooked by his dear wife Sophie, and a couple of drinks, great conversations. These are things that we would ever forget. The last time we saw him, we flew down to Delhi when he was ailing. He was in Rajiv's house, and it was a journey filled with pretty heavy emotions and some memories. And when we saw him, my wife and I were discussing on the way back that sparkle in his life, that acerbic wit, that dry humor, all that was by then gone. He probably knew that his end was near. But we're glad we saw him. We were very happy we got to see him. Soon we learned that he was no more, he's not with us. But it's something that we will always remember. He lived a good life. He did a lot of good deeds. And he has left behind a lot of us who's, for us, he is much more just a teacher. He touched our lives in several different ways, a lot of love. And he's taught us to lead a life that we still remember and will continue to do so. He was an exception those days, and he continues to be an exception these days. So for us, he was a very, very special and exceptional person. Thank you.
Lord, get away, but Pratima and Srinivas, I think, had the good fortune of being his students and training under him. I actually wasn't his student. But I heard so much in the hostel about PSG. He became a larger-than-life figure because everybody had got either fired by him or got his silent treatment. When he got really angry, he became silent. But like someone said, if you tickled PSG, he could speak for hours. So I had heard so much about him. And I joined as a young faculty, and PSG had just started this division of rehabilitation. And so my professor, who was also a firebrand, said, you're going to go and become the faculty over there and work with PSG. So I can tell you I was more nervous than a student when I was posted. I was a faculty and I went there, but I was quite nervous, having butterflies in my stomach, saying, this, how am I going to handle this person or deal with this person? Because one firebrand in the department was bad enough, and then to have another boss who's going to be. And I tell you, like PSG was that kind of person. You couldn't build any stereotypes or walls for him, because I think he just broke silos. And to my amazement, I he just from day one treated me like a colleague. He never at one time referred to me as somebody so junior, so just out of my training. But right from day one, I was given the respect and the autonomy of a full-fledged colleague. And I can't tell you how much that instills confidence in you and how much you grow as a person as a result of that. So I think what Srinivas said was that we often learn so much, not by his telling us what to do, but just because he was such a towering role model. So that's the first thing that I remember of PSG when I joined DPNR, as we called that. And I think the other thing that Pratima referred to, because DPNR was a very funny department, because we had not just professionals, we had all these vocational training staff, we had nurses, we had aides, we had all these bakery and candle section and so on. And the amazing part was that he never let anyone feel like they were at the bottom of a hierarchy, because he treated with all of them with so much respect and gave each one his due, whether it was a candle maker or a baker or so on. They all felt so valued, and he made them feel that they were very important in the overall patient care. And which is why anytime the PSG came back to Nimhans, you would find all of them. In fact, I think Raji would have had a problem had he held it in Nimhans when we wanted to have the memorial service in Nimhans, because the entire DPNR staff wanted to attend, and they would have been very upset if even one person was left out. That was his charisma with people, even though a lot of people thought he was not a people person, or that he was this silent person, but he had his own way. The other thing was the patients. There were 3 generations of patients who followed him, and I can tell you, when he left Nimhans, a lot of those patients walked out with him, because they would follow him anywhere he went. So they were just so loyal to him, because he was one person who they knew will tell them the truth, not take them for a ride, and give them the best of care. So his compassion, his dedication for patient care, his integrity, as they said, in a rapidly changing world, these were many of the values that we hoped at least to instill ourselves with, maybe not as tall as him, but to a great degree. The other thing was his computer memory. If you had a journal club, he would rattle off all the other references, the year of publishing, the page number, and all of this he would do sitting down like this. He would say, go read AJP, and he will write off all of this. And the students would just be stunned, because computers had entered Nimhans then, but I think the supercomputer was PSG, because if anybody forgot anything, we could go to PSG and say, so where was that article published, and you'll get the reference and you could go and pull it out of the library. So he was and he will even tell you which rack it was. He'll say, now they've changed the binding. From black, it has become a brown colored binding, and you can find it on this shelf on the right side, left side, etc. Everything, location, he will tell you how to go and pull it out. So I don't know how he managed that. And at the same time, like you said, if you mentioned somebody sang a song or hummed a tune, he would tell you so-and-so movie, Sahir Ludhianvi, this was the composer, this was it, who was starring in the film. So you got all that gyan as well. And he was a host of information. If you want to know which is the latest restaurant to eat, I'm sure Sophie and he would have taken Sophie and gone. We would know where, like he said, to buy the best things. He was always immaculately dressed in his half-sleeved ironed bush shirts. And always, like we used to say, where have you got this? And his sandals. I'll never forget, I used to say, if you want to buy a sandal or you want to buy a bush shirt, you must ask PSG, because he had a real collection of them. And the other thing was that in all of this, he had a terrific sense of humor. Because sometimes in the most tense moments and something is happening, and then, very tongue-in-cheek, he will let off one joke, and suddenly all that tension will dissipate and we'll all have burst out laughing. So he had an uncanny ability of just putting everybody at ease in a flash of a second. And I think, to be honest, at Nimhans, I don't think there was any professor who could even come not even to the 50% mark of what PSG knew, both in terms of his knowledge, in terms of his skills, in terms of his widespread reading. I don't think there was anybody who was a match. Maybe that was a sad thing because he really didn't get the kind of intellectual stimulation from his own colleagues that he might have got, and maybe that's why he spent more time with students and junior colleagues who were, better read and who were well versed with other things. He was way ahead of his time because I think Nimans has never acknowledged the fact that he started most of the so-called subspecialties in Nimans exist today because of him. Family ward, de-addiction, rehabilitation, you name it, it was PSG ahead of his time thinking that these are branches that should have come. These have all become, I think, now full-fledged divisions. Some of them have become their own departments, even child, for example, child psychiatry. So he was way ahead of his time. And I think life was not fair to him. If I would say that he was a man who took it very stoically, just because of the kind of person he was. Nimans didn't treat him well. He went out of Nimans for a while, came back, but he went to Ranchi. So he didn't really get the recognition and the kind of merit he do. But I never saw him being bitter or being skeptical or, in any way letting us perceive that. And I think Rajni's going away was the time that I would say I really saw something break inside him. I mean, I've never seen him go, be that way, but I think with that I saw a change in the PSG. I knew something, literally like a light went out somewhere, and I didn't really see that flicker again, even though we did meet very often after that. And so I've personally learned a great deal, and he was both a mentor and a dear friend. We, of course, became part of PSG's extended family. Srinivas and I have spent many, many evenings on the campus with PSG and Sophie at her place, having fabulous food, vadas, coffee, filter coffee, cakes, you name it, good music. We've seen Rajni and Rajiv literally grow up there. And it was always a warm and welcoming home. Anytime we could call, we would drop in, and even at such short notice, Sophie would produce her fantastic vadas and coffee, and it was always cake. I don't know how. Anyway, Rajiv seems to have taken over that, at least the baking skill. Rajni was also a good baker, but anyway, Rajiv seems to have taken over that. So they were always a very warm and welcoming place for us. So it's, I think, I mean, if we start talking, and there are so many evenings, I was pulling out photographs, and in fact I was telling Sophie I found a letter that he'd written in 94 when he was in Ranchi, inland cover, and he's written in his neat handwriting and so closely, and he's filled up the side, and that folding that you do, so you have to tear it very carefully because you shouldn't miss a word. And it's one of those letters that I have really kept because it like she said, he was an eloquent writer, and it was something that I'll always be fond of. So lots of memories. So I just like to end with this quote that those we love don't go away. They walk beside us every day, unseen, unheard, but always near, still loved, still missed, and very dear. I think that's PSG for us. And Sophie, we just want to say that we're always there for you, and we hope that you will remain the same. I know, like someone said, you were just the apple of his eye, and I'm glad he went first, because I think he would have been just totally lost if it had been the other way around. He just wouldn't have known. She was not his right hand, left hand, every hand. Sophie was his world. And I think she also introduced him to a lot of these things. They shared so much interest in common, the movies and the music and food, and so I think a lot of the way they kept their home, I think Sophie has a lot of that credit, because she gave PSG what he looked for. And I think sometimes she said, it's like this. And even the other day I told her, I said, it should not have been any other way around, because he would have been a lost soul without you. So he meant, you were his world. And so Sophie's world, we used to joke with that philosophy book, So to PSG we would say Sophie's world, because that's what it was for all of us. And so we are here, and I'm sure he's in a good place, and I'm sure Rajni and he have met up, and so I'm sure I just wish that him the best, and wish the family the best, and Rajiv's kids, that they grow up. Unfortunately, they will not remember much, and I think this memory palace and these stories is what Rajiv will have to pass on to his sons so that they come to know what a lovely person their grandfather was. Thank you.
Has a lot of disadvantages. Everything you wanted to say about Gopi has been said. And the scientific audience, when you send a paper for publication, the editor asks you what is already known, what your paper is going to add. Well, I hope I can add something to what has already been said. I would be more personal than professional because I think there's quite a bit of professionalism that has been expressed. I want to start out by saying that my father was a great manufacturer of children, and he had 9 children, and Sophia is the 7th. And every 2 years, like the Ford or Toyota, he used to produce a model. And this model which came, Sophia, you all know her, is one of the best models that he has produced. I'm not sure whether Gopi is lucky to have her or Sophia is lucky to have Gopi. But I feel personally that Gopi is very, very lucky to have Sophia as his wife. As has been mentioned, Sophie's world and Sophie's making Gopi what he has been professionally and personally. I have many memories of Gopi, and most of it has been mentioned. And professionally, he called me to address his students in Bangalore, Nimans and Manipal, and I enjoyed his company. But I feel that he is one of those strong, you'll agree with me, silent, stable, sophisticated scholar. As you mentioned, he knows psychiatry from A to Z. More than that, most psychiatrists don't know much psychology, but he knew psychology. And so I admired him for that and addressed him and sent some of my students to talk to him about counseling, psychology and so forth. And the last discussion he had with one of my students was traditional methods of healing for mental health. And I was impressed by his range of knowledge and how he was able to guide. Most people think that traditional medicine means beat the person black and blue and see that the devil runs off. But he had much more empathetic view of the psychic therapy that traditional healers use. Having said that, I also want to touch upon his presence as my brother, husband, father, grandfather, and the way in which he has been also a loco parentis for one of my sons when he joined the RV College of Engineering. Gopi and Sophia were like their parents, set them up in the hostel, bought them the beds and mattresses and table chairs and so forth. And he really guided my son in the way to maintain himself and keep up his role, dignity and status in the hostel. I think but for Gopi and Sophia, my son would not have been what he is now. He is now a rehab engineer in Florida and he always remembers Gopi and Sophia. I also have great respect for his knowledge of Bangalore city, particularly Basavangudi and Malleswaram and all those shops. He took us to Angadi and Gandhi Market and also to the MTR was his favorite. You all know that he's an expert on masala dosa. And he introduced me to, and he said, where else can you get such a masala dosa? You know, I told him that masala dosa in Shanti Sagar, that's nothing, rubbish. Only MTR, what is favorite. As has been mentioned, he was also a connoisseur of classical Carnatic music and Tamil movies. I have seen here old movies like Ratta Kannir, which was featuring leprosy, and he knew every bit of it. When I wanted to buy a classical Carnatic music, he took me to Landmark and made me purchase a couple of good musics, which I still have. Even though the CD era has come, he was very, very familiar with all of the famous Carnatic singers. And I have great respect for Sophia because it's very difficult to be the wife of a psychiatrist. You agree? And the way she has made him what he is, I respect her, I salute her, and tomorrow being the International Women's Day, I think we should remember Sophia as one of those great women behind successful man. I think very happy Rajiv Gandhi, the name Rajiv is so famous, and Rajini, who introduced me to screwdriver and a few other exotic appetizers. And when I come here, I always I'm happy he will quietly go and get me a kingfisher without asking. Such a good host, and I think a lot of his training is because of Sophia. I think these things, being a good host doesn't come easily, and so I remember Sophia, Gopi, and hospitality, and I'm always happy that keep his memory green and fresh. And I think you have prepared an excellent lunch. I don't want to stand between the lunch and then might become tea. So with these few words, I want to thank Sophia for inviting me and Rajiv to talk and to remember Gopi, his humility and his greatness. You know, it's very difficult to find these two together. A person who is so humble and yet so erudite and scholarly. I praise God for giving me the opportunity of having him as my brother. I won't say brother-in-law, but as a brother. Because I have only 2 brothers, one of them is not there. But I have 6 sisters. And the husbands of all those are like my brothers. And my favorite brother would be Gopi. Thank you very much for your patient listening. God bless you all.